Hello everybody and welcome to this afternoon's seminar on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We're just people are just joining us now, so we'll wait a minute or so more and then we'll kick off. I can see more participants joining, so we'll just give a couple more minutes before we start and then we'll kick off. Okay, so thanks everybody. Welcome to the first of two online seminars that MDUK is holding this afternoon as part of our Muscles Matter online seminar series, Living with a Muscle Wasting Condition in 2020 and Beyond. In this series of 12 seminars, we'll be exploring what it's like to live with a muscle wasting condition in these unprecedented times. 6 of the seminars are exploring specific conditions aligned to awareness days, weeks and months that are taking place between now and the end of October. And the remaining 6 are looking at a range of topics relevant to anyone affected by muscle wasting conditions. Last week, we explored SMA and also living in a world with COVID-19, and the list of remaining seminars and the link to go to if you want to book further sessions should be on your screen now. We're very grateful to Sarepta for supporting the Muscles Matter online seminar series through their generous sponsorship. MDUK is holding these seminars because for now we're unable to bring our community together through our information days, family fun days, national conferences and our muscle groups. I think it's really key to flag that our helpline remains available to anyone affected by muscle wasting conditions. So do please contact us if you have any questions or are in need of support. We can either help you with information and can either support you directly or point you to where you can get that support from. So again, the number and email address should be on your screen and you can call us on 0800 652 6352 or email info@musculardystrophyuk.org. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's supported our work through volunteering their time or by making a donation, particularly in the last few months. We're hugely indebted to everyone who's helped us to ensure that we can continue delivering activity like today's session. There's a vast array of ways in which you can support MDUK, so do please contact us if you'd like to explore that or visit our website to make a donation. So this afternoon, we're focusing on Duchenne muscular dystrophy following Monday's World Duchenne Awareness Day. And we'll be exploring both the latest developments in research and also discussing living with Duchenne. Before we welcome our first panel, a note on how you can ask questions or make comments throughout the session. So many of you have submitted questions in advance and we'll seek to cover these later. And we'd also like to incorporate some live input. And to do this, we'll be using the Q&A function that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. So please type your question or comment and we'll feed it into the discussion. And to help us manage the technical side of the event, we won't be calling on questioners to ask their questions directly. And any questions we don't manage to cover or that we don't know the answer to, we'll seek to answer through our website afterwards. And finally, a reminder that we're recording this session and that it will be available in the next 24 hours through our website, along with the previous sessions we've held. So to start us off this afternoon, I'd like to welcome MDUK's Director of Research and Innovation, Dr. Kate Adcock, who will introduce the first introduce the research section of this afternoon's seminar. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Rob, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to first of all start by welcoming our two research speakers this afternoon. It's Professor Francesco Muntoni and Professor Jenny Morgan, both of whom are from UCL, University College London. Professor Muntoni is a paediatric neurologist known to many of you, I'm sure, who trained in Italy but has worked in London since 1993, first at Imperial College and now at University College, where he's director of the Dubovitz Neuromuscular Centre at the UCL Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health. He's also honorary consultant at Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children. Francesco is a chief investigator for over a dozen natural history studies and clinical trials in paediatric neuromuscular disorders, as well as being the principal investigator on a number of research projects across a number of neuromuscular conditions. Jenny Morgan is Professor of Cell Biology at UCL. She got her PhD from Charing Cross and Westminster Medical School, has been based at UCL Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health for several years now. The focus of her research is to understand the biology of skeletal muscle, with a particular emphasis on identifying the cell types that contribute to muscle regeneration. And in sort of learning more about these cell types, how perhaps they can be manipulated to enhance muscle repair and regeneration. And she's going to tell us a bit more about that later on. Before I invite Francesco to kick off his presentation, though, I'd just like to publicly thank him on behalf of Muscular Dystrophy UK and all of our community for the role that he's played in helping MDUK to provide accurate and appropriate advice and information for people affected by muscle wasting conditions during the coronavirus pandemic. Francesco is one of the 4 clinicians who's been supporting us, and certainly in the early weeks of the pandemic, he was dealing with an awful lot of email traffic from us. So thank you, Francesco. We're really grateful for all of that. So firstly then, I would like you, Francesco, if you wouldn't mind to tell us a bit about you, to present some work to us. I believe you're going to be talking to us about the North Star Network today, and the slides should be available right now. Or in one moment. Here we go. Over to you, Francesco.
Good afternoon. Are you going to do the driving, or do you want me to do the driving?
If you wouldn't mind just saying next slide.
Okay. Well, thank you. Firstly, thank you for asking me to talk. I'm not missing too many emails from MDUK, but I'm joking. I think that you thank me, but and remaining 3 colleagues, I think really it has been a community effort from all the consultant physiotherapists, the consultant physician, and the specialist nurse across the UK that help to, we hope, to provide some indication regarding what to do in the COVID-19. So, and this introduced me to the North Star Network, because to some extent the North Star, that is a long-standing initiative funded by the MDUK, has really provided the glue between a number of clinical sites in the UK and to provide if you like, a sounding board for ideas that goes much beyond what has been achieved with the individual aspect of the network. So next slide, please. And I will be talking about a few things. Firstly, what is the North Star Network? Also, what is that the network has accomplished, both in the field of standard of care, of understanding disease trajectories. It's quite interesting that once you started digging, you realize that even things that you thought you understood well, such as this is the Duchenne muscular dystrophy disease progression, you realize that there are aspects that have never been described until now. And I'm sure there will be new things that will come up in the future. We have been providing a lot of information for the field that are helping the design of clinical trials. And the North Star has also helped a lot to recruit children into national clinical trials. I'm very grateful for this aspect that for the last 10 years has facilitated recruitment across the country. And also another aspect, I will not have much time, but I think is also useful to have the North Star Network to not saying benchmark to try to say who is better, who is worse, but having a sense of whether the clinical course of the children in this country, how do they compare with children in other countries, but also, as you will see, for facilitating potentially drug registration. And then the last slide will be in the next challenges. Next slide, please. So the North Star network, what it is, well, it is if like a network that links 23 centers in the UK. And this was established quite a number of years ago now, in 2003. Probably most people don't know why it's called North Star, and I will explain to you. And this was a fundraising of Michael McGrath for MDUK. If you go to the, just forward, yes, you will see Michael when he was airlifted with a helicopter, because he's got muscular dystrophy, so he won't have been able to do all the walk himself to the North Pole. But he did the last a few hundred meters. He was able to walk a few steps with his stick. And this was a monumentous effort, and he raised a significant amount of money. And this was eventually used to establish this national network. Originally, the network was established with a lot of work from myself and Adnan Manzoor, and more recently, Vandana is involved in network organization. But it would be very appropriate to thank every single 23 centers. And I can see in the audience, for example, Anna Mayhew, and other colleagues really, and Jenny Sheenan. You know, it's actually difficult to name people. I think it's really been a community effort, and I'm very grateful for all the centers and all the therapists, all the physicians for the work they've done. And they continue to do for the network. Next slide, please. So just go forward again. There is yeah. So as an example of what the North Star has done, directly or indirectly, well, when this looks now, if like a distant past, but when the network was established in the UK, there wasn't a systematic use of corticosteroid in every single center. There was a lot of disparity, and the network achieved consensus on the fact that steroid should be offered systematically to people with DMD. And the agreement was that two regimes will be the preferred one. One is the daily corticosteroid and one is the intermittent corticosteroid. And in the screen on the left-hand side, the bottom left, you see the mean age of loss of ambulation that before the start of steroid is the red line, was approximately 9.5 years. And then on the right side, you see a discontinuous black line and a continuous black line. And this is if like there's a mean age of loss of ambulation of children in intermittent steroid, that is the interrupted line, and the daily steroid, that is the solid line. And this has pushed loss of ambulation in the country by 3-4 years. And we can look at this because now we have a web-based secure database, and currently we have data of nearly 1,500 children. Next slide, or next part. And we also have published on behalf of the network regarding how this information is useful when it comes to trial design. If you want to identify what is the optimal age range or functional range to design a clinical study, many people will refer to these papers that have been published before. Next slide, please. I think again, work is continuing to identify information regarding what is the not only short and medium-term effect of corticosteroid, but the long-term effect of corticosteroid. And there is a paper that has just been accepted, will come out very soon, that is largely centered from data that we had in London, but not only, and the North Star played an important role. And this is to look at the, if like when people get older with Duchenne, what is the effect of steroid on their respiratory function? And you can see in the left-hand side, the bottom red line is the children without steroid, and you realize they have a lower respiratory function, and they also decline with a different slope compared to patients with either daily or intermittent steroid. And on the next part, you also have the difference that corticosteroids are making, not only in prolonging the ability to walk, but also in reducing the risk of or delaying the need for respiratory intervention. And you have with the regime, the naive steroid curve, as you can see, indicated that by the age of 16, 50% of the individuals traditionally would have been requiring respiratory intervention, while this is now a very, very small fraction, both if you use daily or intermittent corticosteroid. Next slide. We also have, if you like, almost unexpected data showing the efficacy of the different steroid regime in improving cardiac or stabilizing cardiac function with dramatic differences from the corticosteroid naive. This is probably going to be the best published evidence that the corticosteroid protect cardiac function in people with Duchenne. Next slide. With, if you like, a curve between daily and intermittent steroid that are not fundamentally different, but they are very different compared to the individuals without, who do not receive steroid. Next slide. An important part that is clear to everybody who is in a clinic room with children with DMD, and of course for parents who see their children, is that not everybody is the same. And in this slide on the left-hand side is a collaborative work that we performed, we published last year on the North Star database. This is, again, I need to thank all the collaborators in the North Star. It's not just my work, and it's not the work of anybody only in particular. It's really a collaborative work. And on the left-hand side of this colored, multiple colored slide, you have the North Star scores. And on the bottom, you have the age and the score at different age. And as you realize, it's a bit of a mess, quite honestly, because there is a lot of overlap with different trajectories. Each of these line is the trajectory of an individual patient. And therefore, what we did on the right-hand side, we divided, we recognized the fact, and we provided some rational division of this trajectory. And we were able to recognize children who, for example, with the red line, clearly have less favorable outcome despite steroid, but at the same time identify a group of children in the green line who follow quite a different trajectory. And make an example, the green line children improve between the age of 4 and 8, 8.5, probably even 9, while the children in the red line already after the age of the 4, 5, at the time of the diagnosis, they show a course of deterioration. And of course, this information is important both for counseling individual families, but also for clinical trial planning. And is quite important that in a clinical trial, this different proportion are balanced, because otherwise you could skew the result of the clinical trial either in one direction or the other. That would be clearly wrong. So this is very important information for the field. Next slide. We also, as I indicated before, we also finding that once you start digging, you discover things that the field had not appreciated before. And on the left-hand side, you have, again, different trajectories of North Star. For example, on the left-hand side, there is the North Star score, and on the y-axis, there is the age in years. And you realize that there are 3 different curves. And these 3 different curves are meaning the children acquire quite a difference. You know, you go from 22 points to 27, 28 points of the 2 different trajectories as maximum achievement. And this is, on the bottom part, now well correlated with learning disability. So we are finding, unexpectedly to some extent, that there is a strong association between the learning disability and the peak achievement of the functional score on the North Star. And this will be, again, important for counseling, but also for clinical trial design. Next slide. I think this is coming to the end of my presentation. I mentioned at the very beginning, we are working also internationally to try to benchmark our own trajectory. Are we doing average, better than average, and so on? But also, in collaboration with the analysis group, the CTAP analysis group, what we are working is to compare the different placebo arm of clinical trial to real world data. And in this particular slide, there is data from the UK North Star, but there is also data from other network, from the Belgian network, the Italian network, the PNC, the clinical network in the States. And what was important in this paper, and one paper has just been published regarding this, a second paper is in preparation. What is important is that the children in the placebo trial that are in the yellow part compared to the children in the natural history study behave in a very similar, essentially identical way. So one argument that now is being followed with FDA, do we need the same number of children in a placebo trial if we can demonstrate that people followed properly in a well-established natural history study show a completely similar trajectory. So the argument is you could still need a placebo arm, but you could reduce the number of children in placebo and enrich the clinical trial for with external control from natural history study. Next slide. So where next? This is my last slide. I think that in the last few years we spent quite a lot of time in strengthening the platform. I didn't mention here, but the platform worked with NHS England and NICE to facilitate a managed access agreement for Ataluren. But I think we have now improved the the partnership with families and people with DMD. We have people with DMD in the steering committee, and we have a currently ongoing work plan to allow both families to access more freely and more readily some of the data that we have on the individual with Duchenne, but also potentially for them to provide some feedback of things that happen in the community. And of course, as there are industrial partners that are interested to be made aware of this data for their own clinical trial planning, we are in the process of making sure that our governance of interaction with partners, with companies, is robust and transparent. And I think this is what is keeping us busy right now. Next slide. And this is the truly last one. And this is just to thank, well, it's not a coincidence that I've been asked to talk about this by MDUK. The MDUK has been supporting this now for a long period of time, and we are extremely grateful. And of course, we work in collaboration with a number of other initiatives. This is the group of people who work with me. I couldn't find a photograph of the remaining participant of each of the 23 centers, but I can guarantee is a large crowd, and we're very grateful for their collaboration as well. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Francesco. That was fascinating. Just a reminder to the participants at home, you can use the Q&A function to ask questions. We'll come to questions once we've heard from Professor Morgan, but just to remind you. And with that, I would like to ask my colleague who has got Professor Morgan's slide set and talk pre-recorded by the magic of science that we have these days. So Emma, if you could press play, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Of using stem cells to treat Duchenne. Of using stem cells. Of using stem cells to treat. So today I'm going to talk to you about the possibility of using stem cells to treat Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And what we're going to discuss is, what is a stem cell, and is there a muscle stem cell? And we're thinking of skeletal muscle or voluntary muscle here. And why might stem cells be useful to treat muscular dystrophy? And what we need to do, still need to be able to do before we can think of applying this in the clinic. So first of all, what is a stem cell? A stem cell is defined by a cell that can self-renew to give rise to more stem cells and give rise to a more specialised cell type. And in our case, we're thinking of the more specialised cell as being the multinucleated muscle fibre. So we've done experiments to show that the satellite cell is a muscle stem cell. We can take a small number of satellite cells, and this is a satellite cell in blue here, and transplant them into muscles of an immunodeficient, dystrophin-deficient MDX mouse. And we've shown that transplanted satellite cells can give rise to new muscle fibres, and we know these are of donor origin as they're expressing dystrophin. They also give rise to satellite cells of donor origin. And these satellite cells of donor origin are functional because when you re-injure the muscle, they give rise to newly regenerated muscle fibres of donor origin. So why might stem cells be useful for Duchenne muscular dystrophy? As you all know, the muscles of patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy lack protein dystrophin. Usually, dystrophin is present around all of the muscle fibres shown here in red. As a consequence of the lack of dystrophin, the muscle fibres are weaker and they undergo degeneration. They do regenerate, but this regeneration fails to keep up with the pace of degeneration. And in the end, this leads to a loss of muscle fibres and their replacement by fat, shown here, or fibrous connective tissue. Of course, there are stem cells in these muscles, but we don't know whether their function is affected by the genetic defect, the mutation in the dystrophin gene, or whether the stem cells are fine and they just don't work very well because of the hostile muscle environment caused by all the degeneration and regeneration. And we're very lucky in that there's a naturally occurring mouse model of Duchenne muscular dystrophy called the MDX mouse that we and others have used for lots of our work. So why might stem cells be useful to treat muscular dystrophies like Duchenne muscular dystrophy? Well, muscular dystrophies are inherited diseases and they're characterised by muscle wasting. Transplanted donor stem cells, when you transplant them into patient muscles, they should expand in number and then fuse together to make new muscle fibres. And within these new regenerated muscle fibres, the missing protein will be expressed. In our case, we're thinking of dystrophin being expressed. And this restored dystrophin will stop the muscle fibres from undergoing any more degeneration in the future. So put quite simply, this approach can be done in either of two ways. We could take stem cells from a donor, grow them up in culture, and we need to expand them in culture because we need to have lots of cells to be able to think of treating a patient. And then we can transplant these cells into the patient. And of course, the regenerated muscle fibres would express dystrophin. The disadvantage of this approach is that because you're transplanting cells from one individual to another, there's a risk that the transplanted cells will be immunologically rejected. So the patient would probably have to go on immunosuppressive therapy. The other approach is to take stem cells from the patient themselves. Of course, these can be directly transplanted back, and regenerate muscle, but the regenerated muscle fibers still wouldn't express dystrophin, so the fibers would continue to undergo degeneration and regeneration. The other approach is to take the cells out and then either insert the dystrophin gene or repair the patient's dystrophin gene. So we can insert the dystrophin gene by putting the dystrophin gene into what's called a viral vector, and we use a lentiviral vector, and use this viral vector to carry the dystrophin gene into the stem cells. The other way is to correct the mutation in the dystrophin gene by using gene editing or CRISPR-Cas9 that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. The disadvantage of repairing the gene is it would have to be done for each patient's stem cells individually. If we had a lentivirus coding for all of the dystrophin, that could be used to carry the gene into stem cells of all patients. So then these cells can be transplanted back into the patient, where they will contribute to muscle regeneration. The regenerated muscle fibers will produce dystrophin. The advantage of taking stem cells from the patient is that they're less likely to be immunologically rejected. So this approach has many challenges, not the least in that we have over 600 muscles in our body, and we'd need to be able to carry the stem cells, restore dystrophin in all of these muscles to be really effective. So the cells would have to be delivered rather than just injecting into each muscle systemically, ideally by the blood system, so intravenous injection. The hostile dystrophic muscle environment might affect the stem cell function. And as well as skeletal muscle, we've also got to think of heart muscle, which also lacks dystrophin in DMD patients. So our preclinical work has shown that we can take stem cells from mouse or human muscle, and when we transplant these into the muscles of a host mouse, and the host mouse lacks dystrophin and is immunodeficient, so will accept transplants from other strains without rejecting them. So when we do this, when we inject the cells intramuscularly, the stem cells contribute to regenerated muscle fibers and to satellite cells. But we've only managed to do this when we inject the cells into the muscle, and it doesn't work if we inject them intravenously. So this is a section of mouse muscle injected that was injected with mouse satellite cells, and you can see that there are lots of muscle fibers expressing dystrophin, but they're in one large group, and you can see that elsewhere in the muscle there are no dystrophin positive muscle fibers. And similarly in this muscle that's been transplanted with human stem cells. So this is a problem. There's a limit in the amount of muscle formed, and it's not spread. It doesn't restore dystrophin in the entire muscle. So our ongoing work is to really identify what is the best stem cell type to use. Is it satellite cells or other cells derived from skeletal muscle, or a different type of stem cell called an induced pluripotent stem cell? And these are of great interest in that you can get them, you can actually make them from skin fibroblasts, which means you don't have to do a muscle biopsy, you just take a little scrape from the skin. And these cells are pluripotent, they can be made to be pluripotent, and they can be coated to make muscle cells. And we and others have shown that if you transplant these cells into mouse models, they give rise to regenerated muscle fibers. So we want a cell type that can be grown up to large numbers before ready to treat the patient. And after they've been grown up to large numbers, they still remain as stem cells. So we don't know whether we're going to take the cells, it would be better to take the cells from a donor or from the patient themselves and genetically modify them. So the real challenges are getting enough cells to treat all muscles body-wide, to deliver them systemically so that they can be, for example, given intravenously, they reach the muscles, and when they reach the muscles, they can contribute to muscle regeneration and reconstitute the muscle stem cell pool. And the muscle environment itself might have to be modified to improve transplanted stem cell function. And a real challenge is getting enough dystrophin within the transplanted muscles to be of benefit, because we know from lots of other work that we need nearly all of the muscle fibers to express at least a certain amount of dystrophin to make the muscles stronger and to prevent them from undergoing further degeneration and regeneration. So the work that I've talked about very briefly today, I want to acknowledge all the people that have contributed to this over the years, and I hope that I haven't forgotten anyone. And we're extremely grateful to all the people that have funded this work, in particular Muscular Dystrophy UK, which has really provided funding for the work that I've done since the very start of my career. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny, for your video in advance. And we have got some time for a few questions. Just a reminder to participants to take advantage of the question and answer function that we have. Sorry, I'm looking over there because I've got it on my screen, and we're dying to hear from you. In the meantime, though, we did have a couple of questions in advance, and one of these is actually fantastic in that this is a question to Francesco and to Jenny, really, both of you. In the last 20 years, what would you say has been the single most significant development in the search for an eventual cure for Duchenne? And why do you think this has been so important? So maybe, Francesco, if I can go to you first.
Well, I think that firstly, cure is a big name because cure means taking away completely the condition. And I think it's important to realize this is complicated in most conditions in the human being, okay? So I think that if we say therapeutic advances is probably a better reflection of most of what happens in real life in the majority of the conditions. I think that from my perspective, the, if you like, the two areas where there has been significant progress is understanding of some of the molecular mechanisms responsible for Duchenne. And in this, there is not a single particular, if you like, therapies. But I think, you know, if you go 20 years ago, the gene had only been cloned, you know, by 10 years before. Very little was understood. Not even how you would start to approach the therapy would be possible to imagine. And what you have seen is that now with understanding better which are the various pathways that may be affected, therapeutic interventions are being developed to target each of these different pathways. One that appears to be promising as a result of the improved understanding is, for example, antisense oligonucleotide. However, I would also say now we better understand the limitation of the antisense oligonucleotide, and therefore now the next generation antisense oligonucleotide have been developed to try to address some of the limitation of the first one. So unless you start the path, you can never go forward. That is one. And probably, you know, in the last few years, AAV gene therapy appears to be progressing also in a way that is very reassuring. It's early days, but there is no question that the recent progress has been quite impressive.
Thank you. Absolutely. It's fantastic. Jenny, over to you.
Oh, hello. I hope you can hear me properly because there's all sorts going on outside my house. So I think it's so much has happened since I first started working on muscular dystrophy and cell transplantation. And I think it's the understanding of what's going on in the muscle, as Francesco was saying, the pathways. Now, I'm more interested in the cell types which contribute to muscle regeneration and how other things that are going on in the muscle affect the stem cell function and regeneration, and how it can be modified. I think stem cell transplantation is very challenging, but something really exciting in the field in the last 5-10 years is induced pluripotent stem cells, and whether they can be harnessed to either to understand what's going on or to treat muscular dystrophies.
Brilliant, thank you. So actually, staying on the subject of stem cells, Jenny, we've had a couple of other questions. So with regard to stem cells, could this be beneficial to hand function in adults?
That's a very good question, because we had thought that if you could just treat the small muscles in the hand of a patient with stem cells and they restore dystrophin, this could indeed be of benefit. The challenge is to get enough cells to treat a very large muscle. So a small hand muscle is probably sufficiently small to be able to be treated in this way.
Right. But we still don't have really any idea on kind of time frame of when that might be a reality.
No. I think it, yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on funding.
Yeah. And again, I guess a question perhaps slightly more for Francesco. Francesco, we often think of Duchenne muscular dystrophy as a condition that affects mostly boys and men, but there are females who are affected, some girls and some women with known as manifesting carriers. Could you comment a little bit on that, perhaps?
Yes, you're right. I think that if you like, is not common, and in actual fact, in most recent manuscripts, it will be mentioned that Duchenne typically affect males, but atypically or more rarely may affect females. And we have in clinic the full spectrum of people, from truly DMD girls, if you like, in terms of the clinical features, being as severe as a boy with Duchenne, to people who maybe, or young ladies or young girls who may have intermediate level of difficulties. There are different reasons why this may occur, and the numbers are small, but for example, the North Star, I'm aware of at least 5 girls with DMD who are present. The natural history of being a carrier, a manifesting carrier or a DMD, is complicated because there may be the graduation there of how significant people may be affected, can be even bigger than the one in DMD. But certainly it may occur. I think that the good news, I suppose, is that if some of the therapeutic options under development would be effective, there is no specific reason why they would not be applicable to individuals who are females. Understandably, and sometimes a little frustratingly, when it comes to clinical trials, the clinical trial try to identify a very narrow group of people, and for that reason, female carriers are excluded. But if gene therapy or antisense oligonucleotide or an antifibrotic or whatever will found to be effective and will be adopted as a therapeutic treatment, there is no reason why this will not work in a young lady or girl.
Fantastic, thank you. That's very informative and very helpful. I think this is a group of people who possibly feel a little bit isolated in the studies because of the reasons that you say, very understandably, about clinical trials being quite specific in the inclusion criteria, but the outcome later maybe have a broader application. And just one final question before we move on back to you, Jenny. I guess, I mean, we're talking about gene therapies, which generally, at the moment at least, is in being sort of tried in younger people. So again, we're not close to a stem cell therapy, but could this be something that perhaps could be something for older people later on?
Yes, because as long as the muscle environment wasn't too damaged so that the stem cells could function normally, certainly in preclinical work we've done, the age of the host mouse or the donor cell didn't make any difference. It functioned perfectly well.
That's great news, thank you. Super. I'm so sorry, everyone, but we could continue all day, I know, but we do have to wrap up the research session to move on to our panel session about living with Duchenne. So thank you both to Jenny and to Francesco. And Francesco, thank you. You're going to stay with us for the panel discussion as well. So Jenny, thank you very much. We'll now move on to, as I say, the living with session, and just a reminder that people can continue to add questions to the question and answer function in the Zoom chat, the Zoom functionality. So joining Francesco on the panel, let's move on, is Professor Tracy Willis, who's consultant paediatric neurologist at the Roberts Jones and Agnes Hunt Orthopaedic Hospital in Oswestry, where she's the clinical lead in neuromuscular disorders. And she also runs the neuromuscular service at Birmingham Children's Hospital. And since 2018, she's visiting professor at Chester University. As Francesco has already mentioned, she's part of the North Star Network, and she's part of the Adult North Star Network, where she's been leading on palliative care and has recently written a book chapter on palliative care and developed an e-learning tool on neuromuscular conditions for palliative care doctors. Joining the panel also is Dr. Patrick Murphy, who's respiratory consultant at the Lane Fox Respiratory Unit at Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Trust. Dr. Murphy is also clinical lead of the Lane Fox unit, which is one of the largest centres of its kind in Europe. He's a reader in respiratory medicine, also at King's College London, where he researches into the respiratory physiology and optimisation of sleep-disordered breathing in patients with chronic respiratory failure. Joining them is Dr. Anna Mayhew, who's consultant research physiotherapist at the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Centre at Newcastle University Hospital, where she leads several research studies while continuing to work with clinics with children and adults. And she has a special interest in the development of robust and clinically relevant functional outcome measures for all types of neuromuscular disorders, as well as developing suitable patient-reported outcome measures, importantly as well. And Anna is a member of MDUK's Medical Research Committee. Joining them is Jenny Sheehan, who is the clinical specialist paediatric physiotherapist at Evelina Children's Hospital. She has many years' experience in working in neuromuscular disorders, and again was involved in the North Star Network and the development of the North Star Ambulatory Assessment for Duchenne, which Francesco has already talked about. And she's also on the steering committee for the network. Finally, last but by no means least, is Natalie Smith, who's a neuromuscular clinical nurse specialist at Great Ormond Street Hospital. She's been working with the neuromuscular team since 2017, and she has a background in children's intensive care. She's a lead nurse at the Trust for Spinal Muscular Atrophy, but of course her work takes her across the whole breadth of the neuromuscular conditions that are seen at Great Ormond Street. So I'm going to invite each of our panelists to make a few remarks about their work and supporting people living with Duchenne, and then we'll open it up to questions. So first of all, Francesco, you've talked a little bit about some of the treatments that are in development, gene therapies, antisense oligonucleotides. I wonder if you could perhaps build on that a little bit about what's coming through and what is available at the moment.
Many things that are under development. I think that there are different studies at different stages of development. And you mentioned gene therapy. At the moment, there is, as soon as the COVID-19 that has slowed down, not just in the UK, globally, as you can expect, the clinical study to open. At least 2 AAV gene therapy study should open this year in this country, and a third one shortly after. So there will be, certainly by 2021, 3 AAV gene therapy program for Duchenne. Other things that are, if you like, that new therapies that will be studied for the first time will be a modify next generation antisense oligonucleotide called PPMO, peptide conjugated morpholino antisense, that continues, if you like, the experience of some of the first generation antisense. I think we will see this year, or certainly early next year, the outcome of some of the ongoing clinical trial, because some of the studies have started earlier on. So they are now coming to the wrap-up phase, or wrap-up of the understanding phase. And these are, for example, studies to measure drugs that can affect the like steroid, what they are called steroid sparing. So they are drugs that may be used potentially instead of steroid, or by reducing the steroid, but they work in a way that is not fundamentally different from steroid, but are supposed to have less adverse event. So this is we will hear quite soon about the result of this study. And similarly, there are two additional studies, one on antifibrotic therapies and one of drugs that may improve muscle regeneration. And these are already quite advanced, and we expect in 2021 to have some outcome of these studies.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself then. Moving on to Tracy, I wonder if you could give us an overview of the kind of support your service provides for people living with Duchenne.
Yes, thank you, Kate. Yeah, so our team based in Oswestry at the Robert Jones Agnes Hunt is a multidisciplinary team, and we try to offer a seamless clinical transition both through from pediatrics to adults, as we offer both pediatrics and adult neuromuscular care, and it's the same neuromuscular team, and we try as much as we can do to do one-stop shop clinics where we have visiting clinicians that do the cardiac clinics with us, both pediatrics and adults, as well as our ventilation service. So really, you know, sort of that's what we try and offer, as well as our support with our psychology service and our specialist nurse and care advisors with regards to support at home, and liaising with a lot of the local services, because some of our patients live some distances away from our clinic. As we're on the edge of North Wales, we cover a lot of North Wales as well as the West Midlands and up into Cheshire as well. So we very often will act as a hub and spoke very often for some of these families to liaise with their local support teams. As you mentioned, we've done a lot regarding the palliative care side of things. So we do work very closely with our palliative care team, trying to provide symptom control clinics, not just for our patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but other neuromuscular conditions. And try and continue our networking along with that, and involvement with MDUK, as well as with North Star and SMA Reach, and our physiotherapists and specialist nurses are involved quite heavily with that, and the various different groups, basically so that they can provide as much support and up-to-date information for the patients as well. And certainly some of our team have been heavily involved with young adult groups for our Duchenne young men, which has certainly proved very valuable, and certainly I think we get as much back from them as they do from us, and they're taking the lead more now with these young adult groups, letting us know what they want to go forward with. So it's great to see them grow, as well as giving us something back and encouraging our younger children as well.
Fantastic, thank you. That's really great. And Patrick, moving to you and thinking about the area of your expertise, could you give us an overview of the respiratory impact of Duchenne and how you support patients to manage this?
Of course, Kate, thanks very much for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here and share our experience around Duchenne. I think I'm the only adult physician, or clinician rather, speaking today, and I think that's one of the things that's a hallmark of respiratory involvement in Duchenne, is that really it's incredibly unusual before the loss of ambulation, and so really it typically happens in that transition period between pediatrics and adults, and that's why integrating between those two sides of the service as a respiratory physician is really critically important, because at that transition point when patients are reaching sort of adolescence in Duchenne is the time at which generally they lose ambulation and respiratory involvement comes in. respiratory involvement in Duchenne is similar across the other organ groups, in that it's a muscle disease and therefore it's a respiratory pump problem. There just isn't a sufficient muscle capacity to generate ventilation, and that leads slowly towards loss of respiratory function. Now, because it also coincides with loss of ambulation, often the degree of spare capacity that we all have in our respiratory system to allow for exercise means that is often not picked up initially, and patients with Duchenne may not have overt respiratory symptoms, even with quite substantial loss of respiratory capacity. And that's where, thankfully, the physiology of life is quite handy, in that all of us, when we go to sleep, it's a bit of a respiratory insult, and actually the respiratory muscle pump is affected, the way our brain controls our breathing is affected, and we can use that to identify very early patients who are going to have problems during the daytime, and so we've got very good ideas about when we need to start screening patients for sleep breathing problems, because we know the level of respiratory function above which it's very rare to get sleep breathing problems. Once patients have a sleep breathing problem, we know we then have a window of opportunity. Duchenne, although a progressive disease, is not like some neuromuscular diseases such as motor neurons disease, which can be very rapidly progressive. The progression tends to be slower and more predictable, and that allows us a window of opportunity when we know patients have sleep breathing problems to start to talk about respiratory support. And for us, that generally means supporting patients with a ventilator. That typically is non-invasive ventilation, so that's a mask that goes over the nose or the nose and the mouth, and that just takes over the role of the respiratory muscle pump, so it allows patients to breathe more effectively, and that starts at night when there's a need for support, and as and when disease progresses to the stage where the respiratory muscle pump is affected during wakefulness, patients can also utilize a ventilator during the day. I think one of the biggest advances in terms of respiratory care of Duchenne patients over the last 20 years is that ability to support people non-invasively. And if we were having this talk some time ago, tracheostomy ventilation would have been something that was being talked about. And that's increasingly rare. And I think rightfully so, that patients can be managed with a range of other supports to mean that tracheostomy is much less commonly needed now than it was before. It's still the right choice for a minority of patients, but the majority of patients we can manage with a mask and support, even if they're needing the ventilator for 24 hours a day. I think the other big change in terms of respiratory support of patients with Duchenne recently has been the advent of cough assist. So one of the major complications for patients who develop respiratory muscle weakness are chest infections, and they can be potentially very serious or even life-threatening if not dealt with appropriately. One of the big problems is clearing sputum from the airways to allow patients to breathe effectively and allowing the body to clear the infection with the help of antibiotics. And a cough assist machine does that. And really, in some ways, it does what it says on the tin. It helps you support the cough. So it provides a very big breath in, and then like a Hoover tries to suck some of that secretions out. And that really does help clear the airways. And although that doesn't sound very nice, actually, patients feel much better once those secretions are out of their airways and when they're in, and therefore often having these short periods during respiratory infections with cough assist allows many patients to be managed in their own home, whereas previously they'd have required quite extensive support from the respiratory physiotherapists in hospital. And I think that ability to have support structure in the community rather than requiring hospital admission, I think is increasingly important, none more so now than during the pandemic, when access to hospital facilities may come with added risks and complications.
Absolutely, thank you. And I like what you were saying there about the choices for patients. I think that's important, that people feel that they're able to make some of those choices along their journey. Thinking of other aspects of the care that is required for people with Duchenne, physiotherapy obviously is a vital aspect of care for people with Duchenne. And so looking to you, Anna and Jenny, could you tell us why this is and explain some of the key principles that physiotherapists follow for boys, potentially girls, and men with Duchenne? Maybe Anna, if I could start with you.
Yep. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for this. I think what's most important is understanding how things set up. You'll have your specialist team, which we hope that you all have access to, and they are the people with the information and the people in the know. And if it's about a clinical trial or about what happens next or what to expect or, you know, respiratory issues, that specialist team around you is going to be very important. And they are improving all the time. Tracy mentioned the importance of the psychological support and emotional support, and that's something that not every team is providing as much as they would like to, but it's something that's coming. It's coming through. And having that team around you, a minimum is having your doctor to talk to and having access to the physiotherapist. And we're going to be involved across a whole gambit of things, but the principle behind physiotherapy is about maximizing your functional ability, and making the most of what you've got, and making sure that we keep you in tip-top condition, regardless of whether you're on a clinical trial or not. And I just want to make that really important, that everybody is important to us. It's not just about those on trials. And I would just say how lovely it is that we begin to open clinics up back again. I begin to see some of you face to face. That's making me very happy. So in terms of physiotherapy, it may be about advice regarding exercise and mobility. It may be advice about devices that can help you walk better, move better. It's about advice around the right wheelchair, the timing of the wheelchair, arm function, feeding yourself, managing at home. And of course, so that really then feeds out into the community involvement, and getting the right community team around you is very important, because the specialist centre is much more about assessment, whereas your community team will be about the hands-on work in the home, and that's crucially important. And trying to make sure that you have them in place and that they communicate with your specialist team is vital. And something that Jenny and I have been working on is, and the whole network has been working on, is about upskilling the community so they understand Duchenne better and all its phases. It's about upskilling the pediatric physios who work with the children, but also now the adult networks who are seeing, you know, many, many more young men and are not quite sure what to do with them. So we're working on materials and resources that are available to them. I think in terms of COVID, if I could just say, is that despite all its downsides, I think it has opened up a novel way of looking at ways in which we can assess individuals remotely, respiratory care and assessments done at home that automatically feed that information back to the respiratory clinicians and us, so we can act quicker. Maybe it's about not having as many clinic appointments, but doing a little bit more as a video conference, and only seeing you in exceptional circumstances or if changes are about. So lots to talk about. I'll stop.
Thank you. That's really interesting to have I guess, dare I say, a positive spin on COVID. So that's nice.
Well, it's accelerated some things that we all know seem to take years to happen, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of laptops turn up on our desk, and we've got funding for 200 remote respiratory tests. I don't know how that happened, but that is a positive outcome.
Questions. Super. And Jenny, over to you.
Yes, I would agree with everything Anna said. We do physiotherapy only clinics in addition to the MDT clinics, and I find those really useful for making it more individualised and dealing with the problems that the family actually are facing. And that is one side where it hasn't worked so well remotely. You can do parts of the assessment remotely, but when you actually need to have hands-on and work out this is a problem for this young person, that is more difficult. The other thing that has been more difficult with COVID is that a lot of community physios have either not been working because they've been redeployed into acute services, or they've also had to do online work. The other thing that I've come across quite a lot is a number of families who have got out of the school routine, obviously, because the boys are not going to school, but they've also then got out of having their exercise program and their physio program. And the boys were shielding, so have not been mobilising as much. So now we've reopened up and we're seeing them face to face again. We are coming up against a few problems. We've had a couple of boys who have gone or are about to go off their feet during lockdown period. And that's a time when we would assess and offer the possibility of rehabilitation in knee, ankle, foot orthoses. Normally, we would try and anticipate that coming and have the discussion beforehand. That has been a little bit more difficult recently. Then getting them in to do the assessment is more difficult. And if they require surgery for tendon release, that's another issue that we're currently dealing with. So there's been some problems around that. Which I think we're only just sort of coming to terms with. You know, we've found a way of doing assessments online, not ideally, but some things work. But the dealing with the problems has been more difficult, I think. And the other thing, actually, which I think it would be good for the charity to be aware of, is the number of families that don't have enough or don't have any or sufficient internet access to be able to have virtual assessments. And I think that's been quite difficult. We've had a number of families that have had to do it on their phone rather than over the internet. And it's something I was thinking about a lot recently, that families who we would normally reimburse their travel costs to come to clinic, maybe we should be thinking about helping funding with their internet access, because it tends to be the same sort of families. And, you know, in that situation, we've done telephone calls and it's, you know, it's not the same at all. You know, what you're hearing is not always what you're seeing. So that has been quite an issue, I think. I think community physios are just starting to see children hands-on again. But there's quite a lot of difference, I think, with schools, with PPE and access, and whether a physiotherapist going in is in the right bubble for that school. So I think there's going to be more issues around that. Part of our role, as Anna said, is advising the community physios on what to do. And a lot of them may only see one or two young people with Duchenne in their, you know, work lifetime. So we know that they sort of follow the same pattern, but they are individual. And I think that's harder for the community physios to understand. So I think it's very important that we give them that backup.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I can see that. And thank you for flagging that issue around the accessibility for some families. I think that's an important point. And Natalie, you're a neuromuscular clinical nurse specialist. Could you explain a little bit about what that means and what you do to help support the children that you see with Duchenne at GOSH?
Yeah, it's quite a fluffy role in some respects. I like to see it as the nurse sort of being at the epicenter of a large web of professionals that help. One of the main things that we can do within Great Ormond Street is be the main point of contact for parents, and we can help branch out to other members of the MDT, especially as children and young adults with Duchenne have disease progression. They, you know, as Dr. Patrick Murphy said, they're then all of a sudden thinking about transition at the same time as seeing cardiac doctors more often, seeing respiratory doctors more often. So we try and link into those appointments so that the parents have a bit of continuity there and they're not repeating the same story over and over again. We get in touch with schools and help support EHCP plans. Like Jenny said, we link in with local physios. So it's sort of a bit of an orchestration of care, really. We can get in touch with our consultants if a family get in touch and let us know that someone's having more falls than they were, and we can sort of have the power to bring appointments forward if we feel that necessarily they should be. we sit in on transition appointments, and that kind of thing. So it was a little bit of everything. During COVID, a lot of what we've been doing within our role has been questions around shielding and trying, where possible, to get all of our children and young adults back to school. So linking in very much with those cardiac and respiratory teams to find out what's appropriate. And actually, nearly everybody has gone back to school, which has been great. And I know that that was one of the questions that was pre-given to us, is how are people feeling? And I think a lot of families are actually quite relieved. Schools have got their own guidance that they're going by. Obviously, it's an anxious time, and we don't really have data on children with neuromuscular conditions that have contracted COVID, because everyone's done such an amazing job at shielding. So we continue to work closely with families on their local levels of infection, and then have discussions within the teams about what's appropriate for specific children and young adults in those situations. But it has been challenging.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's important about the return to school, and I guess there's so much packed up within going to school. It's seeing your friends again. It's getting an education perhaps in a different way than you would have done at home. So it's great to hear that so many young people are getting back to school. That's grand. We have got a number of questions coming through, which is fantastic. As Natalie said, we had a couple in advance, and I think probably on the main, people have really pretty much addressed these. The ones we had in advance was about how people have adapted for the services during COVID, and we've heard that there's more remote access to services, and obviously that's not always ideal, but at least it has meant that there has been some contact between families and their clinical teams, and then the thought around going back to school, and people have been able to do that and working with teams locally. We might pick up on one or two of those themes again as we touch on some of the other questions. First of all, we've had a question about sort of the hereditary, the passing of DMD through families, and someone has sent in a question to say that Duchenne's been running through their mother's side of the family for many years, and their brother has Duchenne, and other male relatives have had it. How does this person go around getting themselves and their sister tested to see if they're carriers or not? I don't know who would want to pick up on that one. Maybe Francesco, can I look to you for that?
Well, I think this is if you like, is not an uncommon question, and is one for which we, meaning the system, is quite well equipped. I think that you need to ask the GP to refer you to the local clinical genetics center. The good thing that has happened in the last decade or two is that now the misspelling responsible for the condition is essentially invariably found now. So it will be quite possible and it will be entirely possible and quite precise to tell whether somebody is a carrier or not. So I don't think it's just a blood sample.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And building on a point that Anna raised about the designated psychologists, Tracy, do you have designated psychologists for adults within your neuromuscular team, and do you feel that your patients get sufficient psychological support? And we can obviously talk about that more broadly about psychological support, but just to sort of touch with you first.
Yeah, I think I mean, within our team we just have the one psychologist. However, she's part of the MDT, and as I mentioned before, we see both pediatrics and adults, and as a neuromuscular team we stay the same for both our pediatrics and adults, so we don't have the same transition issues as such. And then we're there when they see the adult cardiologists and adult ventilation team as they transition up to adults. And so our psychologist actually sees both the children, she sees the adults, sees the teenagers, but also sees family members if need be. And certainly that was very evident today in one of our virtual clinics, that in fact one of the mums is actually struggling a lot more with coming to terms with the diagnosis compared to her teenage son, who he feels that he's coping quite well with this actually and adjusting quite well, but mum is really struggling with this, and in fact our specialist nurse and psychologist are going to do some sessions both with mum and with her son, but you know, our psychologist does do work with all of our families, both, you know, sort of the patients and the family members if needed. It is, however, a lot of work, and we certainly don't feel we've got enough psychology, even though we're probably one of the lucky teams in that we do have a psychologist full time with us. But certainly we do feel that very often we need more of her. And certainly over time, she has had to spread herself a little bit over the clinics. Whereas before she just used to sit in clinics and pick up things, now she very much looks through the clinic lists and knows certain patients and families that will need her support and aims to be there for them, but has her individual sessions with them as well, on top of their normal muscle clinic appointments. So yes, we definitely need more of her. We need to clone her. You know, I know that MDUK have done a lot of work with upskilling some of the care advisors, and I know our psychologist was part of that work there, and you know, sort of being part of the MDUK team with regards to that psychological support. But certainly, yeah, there's not enough psychologists out there to help our families as much as we would like. But we try and, you know, sort of give as much as we can to everybody individually and what they need.
Thank you. And Anna, I saw you waving.
Yeah, I mean, it really follows up a little bit on what Jenny said. I mean, I know that CAMs are completely overwhelmed. And I think, just as Jenny said, that we've already discovered that as we go back to face-to-face clinics, our straightforward folk are coming in needing a lot more time to talk. We may be the first visit they've made out of the house for a number of months, and there's a lot that they're trying to get off their chest, and we don't have the resources or unfortunately the time to cover everything that needs to be covered, and then if we're making referrals, as I said, CAMS is certainly overwhelmed and it's very limited in the adult world. So that I think, as Jenny said, we're on the tip of a very uncomfortable iceberg here in terms of what we're going to find has gone on during that lockdown period.
Thank you. And Rob, if I can turn to you, so you sort of talk a little bit about what we've might been doing over the last while.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, mental health is a huge area of focus for MDUK, and it has been for a while. And I think certainly building on what Anna just said, I think is going to be a real area that we want to look at over this coming months and years. We did a major investigation on kind of mental health provision within neuromuscular services a couple of years ago, and that produced a report by the all-party group on muscular dystrophy, which called for greater provision of specialist psychological support for people as part of that multidisciplinary team that people have talked about a lot. And I think that partly is because what we found is that people living with muscle wasting conditions really want to be able to speak to someone who understands what having that condition means. They don't want to spend the first few minutes of any appointment explaining what Duchenne is or what the condition they have is, and that's partly why we've tried to also help upskill the sort of wider workforce. So yeah, as Tracy mentioned, we've it was sort of temporarily halted due to COVID, but I hope to pick up again we're in the process of providing a training session for all neuromuscular care advisors on mental health support. And we're also running a trial service for parents of children with a muscle wasting condition to help them with clinical psychology discussions around their kind of how they're handling the condition of their children, any changes in the condition. So it's certainly an area of focus for us, and we'll certainly be drawing on members of the panel and other groups to kind of restart our Mental Health Matters working group that was looking at this for us. But yeah, it's definitely an area of focus for us as a charity.
Thank you. And that's really helpful. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Anna, Tracy, and Jenny for your input on that. Do feel free to ask more questions through the question and answer app within the Zoom call. I guess just sort of thinking a bit about this time with COVID, and that clinics are starting up again. And I mean, I guess Patrick, for you, are you starting to see more patients coming through your clinic, or is that still, you know, a little strange position for you?
I mean, it's a really difficult time. I just echo what everyone else has said, that you know, we're having contact with patients, as you said, who often have lots of issues that may not be principally respiratory to discuss, and just they need a forum and a sounding board of which to bounce that off, and often have questions, you know, of how they can go about their normal lives and how they can restart things, and they are really complex questions. We have been principally doing our clinics remotely. We're having a small number attending we have a monthly clinic, especially for patients with Duchenne, and so we're having patients come face to face, but in a much reduced number. So we'd normally see 20 patients in that clinic, and currently we're seeing between 4 and 6 face to face, and the rest remotely. And that's just to try and maintain social distancing. If there's you know, anyone on the line who's attended the clinic at the Lane Fox unit, it's, you know, the physical space is maybe not necessarily as large and as functional as we would like, and therefore social distancing is not what it was designed with in mind, and therefore just having patients and carers in that space means we're really limited. I think telephone and video consultations work really well when you know the patient. You know, you've already established a rapport, you and them know each other, and then that is a much easier way to pick up on cues from that person, because you already know what they're like and what to expect. When you haven't got any relationship with the patient and they're entering a service, I think that will be much more challenging, and I'm glad that we're able to get some, you know, face-to-face contact back. We have, you know, I suppose had some trouble with patients in whom we've wanted to see face-to-face but haven't wanted to come in, and there still is understandable concern, you know, about the safety of attending a hospital, about the safety of being in hospital transport. You know, those patients who would normally use public transport, that there's real concerns about how you negotiate all of those things. And so we're trying to find ways of overcoming all of those obstacles to make things as COVID as secure as we can, and having, you know, dedicated transport for patients, having a separate entrance, you know, so they can come straight in where possible, and coming straight into the clinic room and not waiting in the clinic area, to minimize all that contact. And it's, you know, we're working our way through this with patients to find out what their concerns are and trying to address them, because it is really important that some of the interventions we can do can only be administered face to face. Some of the tests we can do, if we want to measure someone's CO2, actually they physically need to be with us, and patients need to have the confidence that we've done everything we can to make that, you know, that journey as safe as possible.
Yeah, thank you. And thinking actually about the sort of the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there was some concern within the community, I suppose, that access to ventilation supplies and ventilation services was kind of drying up, or not available, or, you know, you were able to sort of provide us with some reassurance around that. I mean, I guess, is there any comment you'd like to make, especially as, you know, numbers are starting to rise, if we have even pockets of sort of second waves around the country, how to sort of reassure people?
I think it was unprecedented, really, what the country went through first time round, and you know, we as respiratory critical care physicians needed to respond to that, and you know, to put it in context, our ICU went from, you know, 30 ventilated patients to approaching 130 ventilated patients, and that was, you know, and all of us had to contribute to that care, and that left a bit of a vacuum, in which hopefully we're able to negotiate better second time round, and we're just a bit more forewarned about how we can balance our obligation to the patients we look after, you know, in the community, and our obligation to patients coming through the front door with acute respiratory failure. I think that there is also you know, a better structure overall. Those concerns about supplies, we never had any instance where we couldn't send out supplies to patients. There were some problems because NHS England, effectively ring-fenced and protected certain ventilator supplies, and therefore there was just a slightly different system of how you got hold of that. Once that was negotiated, it was fine, but it did cause huge amounts of anxiety because patients didn't have the usual pathways of which they could go down, and often they went to the normal way of getting equipment, and there was often a lack of information. And I think second time round, there will be more information of well, if this comes in, this is the pathway we go down to get supplies. A little bit of reassurance that we had everything first time round when there was the real surge, and therefore we will be able to continue to supply that to patients, and should continue to supply that right the way through any pandemic. And I think the concerns about ventilator provision and acute care provision, we hopefully made it clear, to all of our patients that we were always available, and we're lucky that there's always one of the consultants on call who is able to provide support to outlying hospitals who may not have the experience of neuromuscular disease, because patients with Duchenne do not have lung failure, they have respiratory muscle failure, and actually that means that ventilatory support should be provided in those patients where it's appropriate, and in that often needs a conversation with clinicians who are less experienced in that area, and we've always made sure we're available for that conversation.
Thank you. And I suppose that leads me on to a sort of another question really about the kind of breadth. You've all spoken about the need and the absolute need for multidisciplinary teams for people with Duchenne. And I think it's sort of, obviously, Patrick, you've highlighted really there the importance of having people with different sort of specialty knowledge and bringing all different things to help people manage the condition. So that's really, really great. Thank you. Does anyone have any final comments that they'd like to make? I'm mindful that we're coming towards the end of the session, so I guess I'll go around the screen as I see you. So Jenny, you are in the first in the firing line, I'm afraid. Any other comments you'd like to make, or any points you'd like to finish up with?
No, I don't think so. I think we've just got to wait and see what happens now. I'm a little, as I said, a little concerned as to what we're going to find when we start seeing patients more face to face. And one thing that I forgot to say actually when I was talking about the physiotherapy side is that we forget sometimes that if somebody has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, doesn't mean that they can't have another physiotherapy issue. This, boys still get sprained ankles and other things going wrong, and that is something that we try to deal with as well on a face-to-face in a physio clinic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Francesco, you're next on my screen. Any more comments?
No, I think that in a way, people with neuromuscular disorder are people with neuromuscular disorder, and the point, I suppose, is we are seeing the anxiety that we see in the anxiety. I have friends with their children who are anxious to go back to school. And, why this would not be the case for people who have Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So some of it is, to some extent, is really something that is happening across the entire population. We have been, for the right reason, I'm not trying to make any political argument, but we've been convinced that to stay home, save the NHS, this is a very strong message, and it's not very easy to completely forget it about that, and is understandable. I suppose especially for the younger people, I'm a pediatrician, so Patrick will be the right person, and Patrick and Tracy, the right people to comment regarding, if you like, above the age of 18. I think that maybe a positive note is the fact that while at the very beginning, the neuromuscular field, and the North Star Network and the international guidelines suggest that individuals with Duchenne, I'm talking about, the 5, 6, 7, up to 15 who are still well, not in cardiac failure, not in respiratory insufficiency. So they were considered to be a very high risk because of the corticosteroid and so on. This advice has been revised, and to some extent, with more information and information about the risk of corticosteroid, this information is revised. So it doesn't appear that there appears to be a major additional risk, unless, of course, you have the comorbidity that Patrick will know better than I do. So in a way, it's probably important to, of course, we all need to be, this virus is not going to disappear, will continue to be with us. At the same time, maybe the original concern that there was an extra layer of difficulty and complication for the young people, the early teenagers with the MD, doesn't appear to be confirmed by the fact, and this is why the more recent guidelines have been less stringent for the kids in that age range.
Super, thank you. Oh, everyone's just moved around. Now I can't remember who I've asked what.
So am I the next one again?
No, you're fine. You pointed the next one. I might come back to you. Actually, we did just have one last question, and I guess that actually, Natalie, maybe you could help here. That there was a question about
the training
network for parents who were sort of newly diagnosed children.
I'm not sure of any training for parents who have been through it, but one of the things that I will say, pre-COVID, having done some newly diagnosed days with the support of MDUK, where we get, it's quite a small group of people, and we get a few families in who've literally just had their diagnosis, and then we included a couple of other families who are part of your network who have maybe got children who are just about to go into a wheelchair or already in their chairs, and those days are so beneficial to help those families who are newly diagnosed, and just the fact that they've gone through the same as the other people is enough, really. I don't think that you particularly need any formal training to be able to help, and I'm sure if they got in touch with you guys through your advocacy service, you could link them up with other families who are maybe looking to talk. But I definitely think that talking to other families who've gone through it and who are maybe a bit further along, because it's so overwhelming in the beginning, knowing do I need a blue badge, I need to think about home adaptations, and you sort of, from my experience, parents sort of focus on everything at once. So to be able to speak to other parents who've gone through things, to sort of say, okay, at this point you should contact wheelchair services, at this point you should start thinking about home adaptations, it makes it a lot more manageable.
Super, thank you. And I agree that the MDUK, go to our website, we can put you in touch with people. The whole system that I had in place has gone completely by the by now. So Anna, over to you for a final thought or comment.
Just very quickly, I think Francesco touched on the importance of that patient voice, and I think that's something that, as the North Star Network and the Adult Network, we're trying to raise the game, and I think that has huge potential when it comes around remote assessment, and it's about understanding the relationship between an individual's opinion of how they're doing and our clinical assessment and how we think they're doing, and their respiratory assessment and how we think we're doing, and understanding that relationship has the potential to reduce the burden both of clinical visits, but also reduce the burden and the shape of clinical trials, to make them easier for patients, because we know that there can be too many visits and too much testing, and maybe there's a different way to do it. So I think that's something going forward that's a positive.
Super, thank you. Patrick.
Thanks. I mean, just to, I suppose, echo the comments that we've had all the way through, that patients, people with neuromuscular disease are, as Francesco said, just that, people with neuromuscular disease, and I think the one message I'd hope people can take from this is that, is that we are, and all of us are here as a service now and throughout, and if there are anxieties or concerns or worries, it's about making sure you contact the clinician if you're not having joy there, services through the MDUK to help support you to access the care you need at the right time, because whatever else is going on in the country now and over the coming months, that the service should be here for you and what you need, and we're, you know, committed to delivering that, and hopefully, you know, we and you can provide patients with some security that they can access that care safely, because I think that was a big fear from us, is that people won't present when they really do need care, and for me that's a big message in the coming winter months. It is, don't be afraid to, you know, to get in touch and raise your voice, because you know, have every right to access that care, you know, in the coming months.
Thank you, super. Tracy.
Yes, yeah, no, I think what everybody else has said. I think there's two things that I want to say, echoing Natalie's thing about supporting families and certainly new patients that have been diagnosed. We've certainly found prior to lockdown, when we were doing some new patient groups and getting families together of similar age children, that actually I think sometimes the dads get forgotten about, and I think they have completely different issues sometimes that they need to sort of vent and explore. And so certainly as a group, we've been looking into setting up some dad groups to look at that, because they very often have different issues that they want to bring to the fore and very often keep to themselves sometimes. And they certainly said that they would like to have a group with the psychology support and stuff. So I think that's something that we want to take forward in the future. But I think secondly, I want to also say that what Anna said was actually there's been some positives that have come out of COVID. Being able to do virtual clinics, you know, we've been able to see our patients, particularly our adult Duchenne patients, so our older boys who are in their 20s, that we were very fearful about, you know, during this period, but actually seeing them look so well, you know, via sort of video platforms has been fantastic. I mean, most of them have got such good setups at home because they're gaming and all sorts, so they've got, you know, the wherewithal to do their video consultations. So it's been great to see them, you know, to actually be thinking outside the box of doing more remote monitoring, so sending out sleep studies and sending out cardiac monitors and devising plans of how the carers and families can put those on so that we can get recordings of them. But also thinking then in the future, as we're starting our face-to-face clinics, that actually, do we need to see them as frequently? Can we do a video clinic in between a face-to-face clinic to cut down on their travel, because some of them travel quite a distance to come to clinic, and only see them when we need to do combined clinics such as ventilation and cardiac clinics? That I think, you know, I think there is a positive on that. And I also think that we can do more catch-ups with them via videos than we have done before, because if they've rung with a problem, sometimes it takes a bit of time to orchestrate getting a clinic room to be able to see them, and you know, sort of setting that up sometimes. So actually being able to say, right, okay, well, we'll have a chat later on this afternoon via video, which I feel sometimes is much more, you get a lot more from them than you do just on the telephone. So I think that's been very positive, actually.
Super, thank you. And Natalie, sorry, I didn't really give you an opportunity to have any final word. I bombarded you with a question.
The only final word really is that I just, thanks to everyone, and even the patients, the families and the clinicians during this time. We've definitely, as nurses, had to be redeployed. I had a long period off with COVID myself, and the families have just been so understanding. And just to echo what Patrick has said about just not leaving it till the last minute to contact us if they're worried about anything. That's my only concern, is that we're maybe missing out on getting the care put in place at the right point if children are starting to deteriorate.
Super, thank you very much. Well, poor chairing on my part, I'm afraid. We've slightly overrun time-wise, but it's been a really great session. So thank you so much to all of our participants on the panel, to Anna, Patrick, Jenny, Tracy, Natalie, Francesco and Rob, while you still stay in the same place. And just a reminder to everyone that the session has been recorded and it should be available in the next 24 hours through our website. And we'll be in touch shortly with a short survey to gather some feedback on the session, so that we can make sure that we do what you want for the future as well. So incorporate your feedback. But thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you face to face at some point in the future. But for now, thank you and good evening. Bye bye.